today's video, we follow an arrogant influencer who was left by her Sherpa high on Everest. She pushed to the edge of the death zone with dumb confidence and zero respect for the risks. And in the death zone, her Sherpa was left dealing with a stupid decision he didn't make. It was March 15th, 2016. The weather station at Everest Base Camp recorded winds exceeding 60 miles per hour, with visibility dropping to less than 50 feet. At 23,000 feet on the approach to North Col, conditions that would ground experienced climbers for days were rapidly deteriorating. The climb had begun at 6 a.m. under marginal conditions that had steadily worsened throughout the morning. Brielle Hartman was 24, a fitness influencer from Arizona, who had expanded into outdoor adventure content to differentiate her brand from the saturated fitness market. Her social media posts frequently showed her bypassing safety barriers and ignoring trail closures, with captions celebrating rule breaking as authenticity and encouraging followers to break boundaries and ignore critics. Her mountaineering resume consisted of day hikes in the Grand Canyon, weekend camping trips in Sedona, and one commercially guided ascent of Mount Washington in New Hampshire during favorable summer conditions. She had arrived in Nepal 3 weeks earlier with extensive camera equipment worth over $10,000, including multiple GoPros, a professional DSLR camera, and portable lighting rigs. Her climbing gear was mid-range equipment purchased online without professional fitting or training. She had hired her Sherpa guide specifically because his rates were 25% below standard guide fees, despite warnings from other climbers at base camp about the importance of experienced guides. She viewed the expedition as an opportunity to create dramatic content that would set her apart from other adventure influencers, deliberately scheduling her attempt during deteriorating weather conditions because she believed challenging circumstances would produce more compelling footage than routine climbs. Her stated goal was to document the entire journey for a planned documentary series. The approach to North Col at 23,000 feet presents one of the most technically demanding sections of the Everest climb, featuring a steep ice climb with fixed ropes across heavily crevassed terrain. The route requires precise navigation through a maze of seracs and ice formations that shift constantly due to glacier movement. March weather patterns in the region create sudden whiteout conditions with temperature drops of 30 degrees Fahrenheit within hours, transforming manageable climbing conditions into life-threatening situations without warning. Wind speeds above 50 miles per hour make rope work extremely dangerous, as climbers can be blown off established routes or become entangled in fixed lines. Visibility under 50 feet eliminates route-finding capability, making navigation dependent entirely on following established anchor points and fixed ropes. At this altitude, atmospheric pressure drops to approximately 40% of sea level, severely reducing oxygen availability and impairing both judgment and physical coordination. The human brain begins experiencing hypoxia-induced confusion within minutes of exposure to these conditions without supplemental oxygen. Hypothermia onset occurs within 5 minutes of exposure in these conditions, progressing to loss of fine motor control within 15 minutes and complete incapacitation within 45 to 60 minutes. The terrain features multiple hidden crevasses that can open suddenly, cliff drops of several hundred feet, and unstable ice formations that collapse without warning. Rescue operations become impossible during active storms due to helicopter flight restrictions above 18,000 feet and the inability of ground teams to navigate safely in zero visibility conditions. Base camp meteorologists issued severe weather warnings for a 72-hour period starting March 14th, predicting sustained winds above 60 miles per hour and temperatures dropping to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast specifically warned against any climbing activity above 21,000 feet during this period. The Sherpa had attempted to postpone the summit push 3 times over 2 days, explaining in detail the technical impossibility of safe ascent during the predicted conditions. He showed Brielle weather data, satellite imagery, and historical accident reports from similar conditions. Brielle dismissed each delay and accused the guide of trying to sabotage her expedition. She continued to film content about overcoming obstacles and posted videos criticizing guides who give up at the first sign of challenge. She refused to participate in basic rope technique training sessions, stating the equipment was too complicated for her aesthetic and would interfere with her filming equipment. During the initial approach to North Col on March 14th, she repeatedly removed her safety harness for unobstructed photos and video shots, forcing the Sherpa to halt the climb multiple times to re-secure her to fixed lines. Each time he explained the life-threatening nature of being unclipped at altitude, she responded that her audience expected authentic content and safety equipment looked unprofessional in her shots. During the early stages of the climb, at 21,500 feet, Brielle had slipped while attempting to film herself ascending a particularly photogenic ice formation. Her crampon caught on the fixed rope, causing her to lose balance and fall approximately 8 feet before the safety line arrested her descent. The incident left her with a bruised hip and scraped elbow, but she dismissed the Sherpa's suggestion to rest and assess for injuries. Instead, she insisted on continuing immediately, claiming the fall would make good content and that real adventurers pushed through minor setbacks. The fall had also damaged one of her camera mounts, but she refused to take time to properly secure the remaining equipment. She ignored the guide's instructions to maintain proper hydration, claiming that drinking water made her look bloated on camera and affected her appearance in photos. She also refused to eat the high-calorie foods necessary for extreme altitude climbing, stating that the food was too messy and would interfere with her filming schedule. As conditions began deteriorating on the morning of March 15th, Brielle began recording videos despite the Sherpa's warnings that the phone battery drain could eliminate emergency communication capabilities when they were most needed. At 22,700 feet, as visibility dropped to 30 feet and wind speeds increased beyond safe climbing parameters, she demanded they continue ascending. She stated that dramatic weather would generate better engagement than clear conditions, and that her audience was expecting summit footage regardless of conditions. She filmed herself criticizing other climbers who had turned back, calling them quitters and fake adventurers who did not understand what real exploration meant. At 22,500 feet, Brielle had experienced a more serious incident when she stepped through a thin snow bridge, concealing a small crevasse. Her right leg plunged through the surface, up to her knee, and only her quick grab for the fixed rope prevented her from falling deeper into the gap. The Sherpa immediately secured additional anchor points and helped extract her from the crevasse, but the incident left her right boot partially filled with snow and her legs soaked through her outer layer. She refused to stop and change into dry socks, insisting that the delay would waste valuable climbing time and that her followers were expecting consistent progress updates. The wet conditions inside her boot would later contribute to rapid heat loss in her extremities. When the guide refused to continue and began preparing for descent, she threatened to report him to the guide service and demanded her money back. She stated that real guides would find a way to make it work, and he was just incompetent, insisting that other guides had taken clients up in worse conditions, and he was just scared. She declared that she would expose him online for being unprofessional and holding her back, threatening to post negative reviews that would destroy his reputation and livelihood. She even accused him of discrimination and claimed that he was treating her differently because she was a young American woman, despite his 15 years of guiding experience and spotless safety record. The confrontation escalated as wind speeds reached dangerous levels. The Sherpa began securing additional anchor points and checking his emergency equipment, standard protocol when conditions deteriorate rapidly. Brielle interpreted these safety preparations as further delays and became increasingly agitated. She accused him of wasting time with unnecessary procedures and demanded they move faster toward the summit. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in the past hour, and ice crystals were forming on all exposed metal surfaces, making equipment handling increasingly difficult, even with proper gloves. Other climbing teams that had been ascending the same route earlier that morning had already turned back and were visible below them, descending rapidly towards safer elevations. Satellite phone communications from other guides confirmed that multiple expeditions were aborting their summit attempts due to the deteriorating conditions. The Sherpa attempted to show Brielle the other teams retreating, explaining that experienced climbers with decades of Himalayan experience were making the same decision to descend. She dismissed this evidence, claiming that other climbers were simply not as committed to their goals as she was. The fixed ropes were becoming increasingly difficult to grip as ice accumulated on the lines. The guide's movements became more deliberate and cautious as he tested each anchor point before transferring his weight. Standard climbing pace at this altitude is approximately 100 feet per hour in good conditions, but the deteriorating weather had reduced their progress to less than 50 feet per hour. Brielle complained about the slow pace and demanded they move faster, apparently unaware that the cautious movement was preventing potentially fatal mistakes. Just before reaching 23,000 feet, Brielle had suffered another mishap when a sudden gust of wind caught her off balance while she was filming. The wind, exceeding 55 miles per hour, knocked her sideways into an ice wall where her shoulder struck the frozen surface hard enough to leave her wincing and favoring her left arm. The impact had also caused her to drop her primary camera, which slid 15 feet down the slope before catching on a rock outcrop. Against the Sherpa's advice, she insisted on retrieving the camera herself, unclipping from the safety line and scrambling down the unstable slope. The retrieval took nearly 15 minutes in deteriorating conditions, and she returned to the route with visible signs of exhaustion and a pronounced limp from twisting her ankle during the descent. At 23,000 feet, with wind speeds exceeding 65 miles per hour and visibility reduced to less than 20 feet, the guide made the definitive decision to turn back as conditions exceeded all safety parameters. The fixed ropes were beginning to ice over, making grip nearly impossible even with proper gloves. Brielle refused to accept this decision, unhooking herself from the safety line and attempting to continue solo while simultaneously filming with her phone. She declared that she would summit alone and prove that the Sherpa was wrong about the conditions. The sequence began when she stepped off the established route at approximately 23,050 feet, following what appeared to be a snow ridge in near zero visibility. The ridge was actually a cornice formation that extended over a cliff face, invisible in the whiteout conditions. The Sherpa called out warnings, but remained anchored to the fixed line, following established protocol that prevents guides from abandoning secure positions during emergency situations. His headlamp beam could barely penetrate 10 feet through the blowing snow and ice crystals. Brielle's initial movement away from the route appeared confident, suggesting she believed she had found an alternative path to the summit. Her headlamp beam moved steadily for the first few minutes, maintaining a relatively straight line that indicated purposeful navigation rather than random wandering. The guide continued calling out directions, attempting to guide her back to the established route using voice commands. The wind carried his voice sporadically, and her responses indicated she could hear him intermittently, but was choosing to continue her chosen path. The terrain she had entered consisted of wind-sculpted snow formations that created the illusion of solid ground while concealing deep crevasses and unstable cornices. These formations are particularly dangerous because they appear navigable in limited visibility, but can collapse without warning under the weight of a climber. The snow conditions were further complicated by the recent storm activity, which had created multiple layers of varying density and stability. Within minutes of leaving the established route, Brielle's confident pace began to falter as the terrain became increasingly treacherous. The wind had sculpted the snow into deceptive ridges and hollows that all appeared identical in the whiteout conditions. Her headlamp beam, which had initially moved in a straight line suggesting purposeful navigation, began to waver and change direction more frequently. The Sherpa could observe her light pattern becoming erratic, indicating she was beginning to realize that the terrain did not match her expectations and that she could no longer see the fixed ropes or established route markers. For several minutes, he could hear intermittent calls for help from roughly 100 feet away, indicating she had become disoriented, but was still mobile and conscious. Her voice carried sporadically through the wind, sometimes calling his name, sometimes shouting for help, and occasionally still attempting to narrate for her phone camera. The tone of her calls gradually shifted from confident to confused, to increasingly desperate as she realized she had lost the route and could not relocate the fixed ropes. Her headlamp remained visible briefly through the storm, appearing and disappearing as she moved through the terrain, before disappearing completely behind a serac formation. The light pattern suggested she was moving in increasingly erratic directions, likely attempting to retrace her steps, but becoming further disoriented by the identical appearance of snow formations in all directions. The wind had erased her tracks within minutes of her passage, eliminating any visual reference points for navigation. The Sherpa faced the critical decision that confronts every mountain guide: abandon his anchor point and risk both their lives in a rescue attempt with virtually no chance of success, or maintain his position and activate emergency protocols that offered the only realistic hope of professional rescue. The established protocol in extreme conditions requires guides not to compromise their own safety in ways that would likely result in 2 deaths instead of 1. He chose to remain secured to the fixed line while activating his emergency beacon, simultaneously beginning emergency communication attempts on his satellite phone. The decision weighed heavily as Brielle's calls for help continued to echo through the storm, but the guide understood that abandoning his secure position would likely result in him becoming lost in the same treacherous terrain that had claimed his client. His years of experience had taught him that emotional responses in extreme conditions often lead to multiple casualties, and that following established emergency protocols, however difficult, offered the best chance of at least one person surviving to coordinate rescue efforts. The wind was now so intense that any attempt to navigate toward her position would require abandoning all safety equipment and venturing into unmarked terrain with zero visibility. The emergency beacon activation process required removing his outer gloves to operate the small controls, exposing his hands to the extreme cold for nearly 2 minutes. Ice had formed on the beacon's exterior controls, requiring him to clear it manually before the device could establish the satellite contact. His satellite phone initially failed to connect due to the storm interference, requiring multiple attempts before establishing a weak signal with base camp communications. Wind conditions made further vocal communication impossible, with gusts now exceeding 75 miles per hour, creating a constant roar that drowned out all other sounds. The temperature had dropped to minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and ice was forming on all exposed equipment. The guide's emergency beacon transmitted his coordinates and emergency code to rescue coordination centers in Kathmandu and at Everest Base Camp. Brielle's emergency beacon, which she had been required to carry, transmitted its final signal from approximately 200 feet below the established route and 200 feet from the Sherpa's position, indicating a significant fall. The beacon data showed she had moved approximately 150 feet from her separation point before the final transmission, suggesting she had continued attempting to climb for an extended period after separating from the route. The signal strength and duration indicated the beacon had suffered impact damage, but continued transmitting for several minutes before failing completely. The final transmission pattern suggested the beacon had come to rest in a stationary position, indicating she was no longer mobile. The Sherpa maintained his position for an additional period, calling out periodically and monitoring for any response before beginning his descent to a location with reliable satellite phone coverage. His own condition was deteriorating rapidly due to the extended exposure, with early signs of frostbite developing on his face despite proper protection. The decision to descend was necessary to prevent a second casualty and to reach communication equipment needed for rescue coordination. The storm intensified throughout the afternoon, with sustained winds reaching 80 miles per hour and temperature dropping to minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow accumulation reached 3 inches per hour, and visibility remained at 0. The guide's descent took nearly 3 hours due to the extreme conditions, following fixed ropes by feel and stopping frequently to prevent exhaustion that could lead to his own accident. Ice had formed on his goggles, requiring frequent clearing to maintain any vision at all. During the descent, the Sherpa encountered 2 other climbing teams that had turned back earlier in the day. Both teams confirmed the severity of the conditions and the appropriateness of his decision to activate emergency protocols. One team leader, an experienced British climber, later provided testimony supporting the guide's actions during the subsequent investigation. The encounter occurred at approximately 22,400 feet, where visibility had improved slightly due to the lower elevation. The guide reached advanced base camp at 21,300 feet and made his emergency call to rescue coordination that evening. He provided detailed coordinates from both emergency beacons, weather conditions, timeline of events, and his assessment of the situation. Weather conditions prevented helicopter operations above 18,000 feet due to severe turbulence and zero visibility. Ground search teams were unable to advance beyond Advanced Base Camp due to avalanche risk and continued storm activity that made navigation impossible even with GPS equipment. The emergency beacon coordinates provided a search area of approximately 200 square meters, but avalanche risk assessment indicated unstable snow conditions that would persist for at least 18 hours after the storm passed. Rescue protocol required waiting for stable weather conditions before deploying ground teams to prevent additional casualties. A specialized high-altitude rescue team was assembled and positioned at Advanced Base Camp, ready to deploy as soon as conditions permitted safe operations. Weather conditions began improving the following morning, with winds dropping below 40 miles per hour and visibility increasing to over 100 feet. The rescue team began their ascent, following the established route to the beacon coordinates. The team consisted of 4 experienced Sherpa rescuers and 2 Western guides with technical rescue training. They carried specialized equipment, including avalanche probes, medical supplies, and emergency shelter materials. A ground team reached the coordinates approximately 26 hours after the initial emergency call. Following standard protocol for severe weather incidents, the search area was expanded to account for potential beacon drift and the possibility that Brielle had continued moving after the final transmission. The team used avalanche probes to search areas where the snow depth exceeded 3 feet, as the storm had deposited significant new snow that could have buried evidence. Brielle's body was located at 22,800 feet, approximately 200 feet below the established climbing route and 150 feet from her final beacon transmission point. The discovery site was at the base of a 40-foot ice wall, indicating she had fallen from the cornice formation and slid down the steep terrain before coming to rest against a rock outcrop. The recovery team found her in a seated position against the rocks, indicating she had survived the initial fall, but became immobilized due to injuries and exposure. The position of her body suggested she had attempted to create shelter against the rock formation, with her backpack positioned to block wind from one direction. Her climbing helmet was still properly secured, indicating she had maintained some level of consciousness and safety awareness after the fall. However, her outer gloves were missing, found close to her body, suggesting she had removed them at some point, possibly due to the confusion and poor judgment associated with severe hypothermia. Her camera equipment was found damaged and scattered around her position. The main camera had separated from its harness during the fall and was found nearby with a cracked lens and damaged memory card. Her phone was located in her jacket pocket, but the screen was shattered and the device was non-functional due to cold exposure and impact damage. Memory cards from her various cameras were corrupted from impact and weather exposure, with data recovery specialists later determining that no footage from the final day was recoverable. Evidence at the scene indicated she had survived for a significant period after the fall. Snow patterns around her position showed she had moved several times, attempting different positions against the rock outcrop. Her water bottles were found empty, suggesting she had consumed her remaining fluids during the survival period. Energy bars from her pack were found partially consumed, indicating she had maintained enough cognitive function to attempt self-care measures. The recovery operation required 6 hours due to the technical difficulty of the terrain and the need to secure the body for safe transport. The team documented the scene with photographs and GPS coordinates for the official investigation. Personal effects recovered included her climbing gear, damaged camera equipment, emergency beacon, and personal identification. Her climbing permit and expedition documentation were found in her pack, along with energy bars she had refused to eat and water bottles that were frozen solid. The routine investigation determined that the Sherpa had followed all established safety protocols by maintaining his anchor position and activating emergency response procedures. The inquiry reviewed emergency beacon data, weather reports, and witness statements from other climbers who confirmed the severity of conditions. Weather data showed that conditions on March 15th exceeded safe climbing parameters by significant margins, with multiple expeditions canceling summit attempts during the same period. The case was classified as accidental death resulting from client non-compliance with safety directives during extreme weather conditions. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.